Grateful to meet and learn in this place together. I'm Jenny Benedict, the director here at West Vancouver Memorial Library. I also have the honor of serving as the chair of the Association of British Columbia Library Directors this year. I will be your facilitator for today for this professional development session, the Redesigned BC Curriculum Opportunities for Public Libraries. I'm delighted to welcome our three speakers today: Ministry of Education Superintendent Early Years Maureen Dockendorf, Ministry of Education Superintendent Graduation and Student Transitions Jan Unwin, and the Director of the Provincial Libraries Branch in the Ministry of Education, Mary Martin. We really appreciate you being with us today to speak to our library community. We know that you've each made a special effort to be in the room this morning, and I want you to know that we do benefit highly from hearing from you in person. We are archiving the recording of this session and making it available on the West Vancouver Memorial Library YouTube channel, so it will reach a broader audience than those that have joined us today. So in the room, we have staff with a real breadth of knowledge and experience. I see front-line staff who work with youth every day, as well as branch managers and department heads, and I even see a library director in the room. Thank you and welcome to all of you. Online, we have about 75 library staff from across the province joining us. We invite everyone to join the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag BCEdLibraries. You can also direct questions to our West Vancouver Memorial Library account. That is at West Van Library. We have someone monitoring that account throughout this webcast today to make sure your voices are heard. And if everyone could now take a minute to tweet out what library system you are from, then we can get a sense of our geographic reach and also make sure everyone's on board and ready to go. So if you have any technical issues or questions via the webcast this morning, please feel free to use the YouTube chat feature, and our technology assistants, Kevin and James, will respond to you. So let's get started. Anyone reporting technical issues so far? No, we're good. Okay, great. So we're here today to learn about BC's redesigned curriculum and consider opportunities for public libraries. This session isn't intended to provide you with a checklist of things to go home and do. It is designed to increase your awareness and understanding of the curriculum redesign and those implementation timelines. It's designed to be an opportunity to ask questions and get clarification on the basic components and concepts and keywords. We hope you'll get a sense of the bigger picture and where your colleagues at other systems are in their discussions and plans. You'll have some time for some group think to identify potential opportunities in your library. And finally, some time for personal reflection to consider your next steps. You might be in a place where it's your very first step with your local school district, or you may have existing partnerships that you want to deepen. So on the screen, you'll see our plan for today. We'll start by hearing from our three speakers, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. And then we'll take a short break, and that will be followed by two small group discussions. So I'd like to introduce the Ministry of Education Superintendent Early Years, Maureen Dockendorf, and the Ministry of Education Superintendent Graduation and Student Transitions. And we thought we sometimes had long titles in the library world.
My card is this big.
Jan Unwin. So please welcome them.
Thank you. So the hardest part for both of us will be to stand here and kind of be looking at because already I want to go over there. So just if I do, someone shoo me back. So my microphone on is working? Okay. So anyway, I just want to say thank you for inviting us. Maureen and I are both educators. We span early years through to post-secondary, and we both share two ministries. So Maureen's with MCFD, Office of the Early Years, and Ministry of Education, and I'm with Ministry of Education and Ministry of Advanced Education. And you'll understand the importance of that as we talk to you a little bit about the adventure we've been on. So we have a short amount of time to tell you a whole lot of information. It's bad teaching. I just want to say that right up front. But we're going to try to give you as much information as we can, and then through questions, we'll try to address anything that you're still wondering about. Now, this is the first piece that I have to do. It's opposite to what we usually do. There we go. So one of the things that, see, I'm just practicing. See that? Okay. One of the things that I just want to share the first couple of slides with is that you don't embark upon a redesign of anything, particularly at a provincial level, unless you do a lot of research and unless you respond to something that's actually happening out in the world, which is exponential change. And I'm really excited to start to form some really overt partnerships with public libraries, because I see your role in this becoming bigger and bigger and larger over time. So I'm excited to be here now, but know that we will come and work with you in an ongoing way as things roll out. But the importance of just putting a couple of slides that kind of make people think up is that this was based on research, it's based on the outside changing world, and it's based on a huge amount of consultation that was done in the province starting in 2011. So this whole thing here, the reason I want to show you this, and you know this because I've noticed that public libraries are adapting the way you operate in the world too, based on things like number of internet devices. The exponential change is what I'm trying to show there. Time for human knowledge to double. So what impact is that going to have on our education system? And when you look at, by 2025, every 25 hours, knowledge will double. It's hard to comprehend, it's hard to wrap your head around, but you can understand why we need to transform and redesign the work that we're doing in order to keep kids engaged. And then the last one that always sort of hits me is this notion around more than 1.5 million robots already, expected to grow by 25 million by 2025, and 2025 is only 9 years away. And if you're wondering why would you include that in a slide, it's because part of this redesign, and you'll really hear this from Maureen in the curriculum, is we want to begin to give kids skills that robots and computers can't do. And Maureen will spend some time on what we're calling core competencies being the main thing. So those are the kinds of things. So out of all of that, plus the consultation, we came up with a vision, and it's called the BC Education Plan, and it's posted online, and you can get more details. But suffice it to say, we've actually said right out now loud, we know the world is changing exponentially. We know we have to give kids different kinds of skills, which involves a more personalized approach to their learning. And we know that they deserve our best work, which will mean we need to find ways to get them ready for a world that looks nothing like it does today. That's the impetus for the changed curriculum. So even though some people think a few people in the ministry had too much time on their hands and they went in the back room and decided they'd redesign curriculum, it didn't happen that way at all. And of course, redesigning curriculum is only the first step. When you redesign curriculum, you have to think about redesigning assessment and redesigning reporting and redesigning the graduation learning years, which I'll follow up with when Maureen finishes giving you the sort of the more of the details around what does it mean, what does it mean to have a redesigned curriculum and a mindset shift. So I'm going to turn it over to Maureen, and then I'll come back and do some graduation learning years. Okay. You need anything, right?
Morning, everyone. Good morning, the rest of BC. Welcome to West Van. Really a pleasure to be here this morning. And just to extend what Jan was talking about, this really did begin in 2011. So this didn't begin last year, even though there's been heightened sensitivity to a redesigned curriculum and competencies this year. And the reason for that heightened sensitivity is due to the fact that it will be in legislation, the K-9 curriculum. Not 10, 11, and 12, specifically K-9 curriculum this fall. So it will be in legislation this fall, K-9. So this year there has been huge attention to what does that mean and what are the implications for school districts. I think Jan and I, there's about 5 of us on an outreach team. Jan and I alone have done over 100 sessions around the province this year. We've been into places I didn't even know there were roads, and a reminder how beautiful our province really is. So as Jan said, it began in 2011. Jan and I, who have been teachers, we've been principals, we've been at the superintendent, assistant superintendent level in our school districts. And what the ministry did was second about 5 of us to say, oh, we really want to make sure we're linking the Ministry of Education and the work that we're doing in the ministry to what's going on in school districts. So those are what our jobs have entailed. In 2011, there were regional sessions, as Jan said. But the other piece, and because you are public librarians, oh my gosh, it's so wonderful to talk to public librarians. I mean, you have a background in research and data in a way many of us don't. So you'll appreciate the lists of where this research came at the back of this redesigned curriculum. So please, and probably many of you have already discovered it, know that it's there. So this is not based on a group of people getting together to write this. We paid attention to the highest performing jurisdictions around the world and what was happening there in relation to student learning. What was happening in terms of what were academics saying in terms of it being foundational to learning, and paying attention to this is no longer the industrial society, which many of the frameworks that you'll see in the past in education were based on 30, 40 years ago. This is a whole new world. And the minister at the day, George Abbott, who I have great respect for, forgetting about any political affiliations, that man cared about kids. And he said, this has to change. So that's the journey we've been embarked on for the last 4 years. The other thing I think is really important for you to know is this was not written by ministry staff. This was written by British Columbia educators. The teachers that were on these curriculum teams were selected by the executive of the BCTF. There are also teacher representatives from independent schools. There are also administrators that sat on these curriculum teams. And just really important that this wasn't this looks very different than it's ever looked before from a ministry perspective. So those are who are the writers. It went out to the field for feedback and has been out there for 2 years worth of feedback. Curriculum teams were called back together. They applied the revisions, and what you've seen this year is a draft of all curriculum, K to 9. And various school districts and teachers and classrooms have been playing around with what does this look like for me? How do we make sense of this? And it's been really interesting, and we've learned a lot from the various sites. Jan's done amazing work with the post-sex, which she will talk about, because it's critically important that whatever we're doing in this system connects with what's happening in post-secondary. We've got universities. VIU is a really good example. When we gave the first draft of the curriculum, K to 9, they embraced that and worked in their teacher education programs utilizing that. SFU as well, UVic as well, UBCO, UBC. So all along the way, the post-secondaries have been involved both through teacher ed and also Jan working to change some of the practice that's happening there to align it with what you see here, K to 9. So this isn't just a one-year thing. This has started in 2011, and here we are now. I think one of the biggest messages that we give around the province to educators, to businesses, to community, is this is a mindset shift. In the past, content was at the center. Content was at the center of what we were doing in classrooms. Now at the center is the learner. So here's your mindset shift. It's the learner that's at the center. Now, the interesting thing about public libraries, which I've had the absolute pleasure to work with, not only in my career, but also at the Ministry of Ed. When Jacqueline was there, we worked really closely together, your colleague here today. You've been personalizing for years. So much of what you see happening here that we're making visible and saying this is the direction that we're going is something you've been engaged in for a long time. So when we talk about personalizing education and educational experience, we're not talking about an individual plan for kids. What we're talking about is kids, students, learners owning their own learning, being able to focus on their passions, on their inquiry, on their questions. What are they curious about? What do they want to figure out? And the gift of this redesigned curriculum is there is space and time for teachers to do so, to put the learner at the center, to pay attention to their passions, to pay attention to who they are, to pay attention to the strengths they bring. This is a strength-based curriculum. This is a learning curriculum. It puts learning at the heart of what we're doing in education. Now for you, that's been your work always. So now we're making this intentional, we're making this visible, the learner's at the center. Content is no longer the destination. Will knowledge always matter? Of course it will. Will rich content with big ideas always matter? Of course it will. But it is no longer the destination in our world. When you can access information anytime, any place, anywhere. This is pushing learning out of thinking about bricks and mortars. This is the work you've been doing. This is about learning anytime, any place, anywhere. It's about learning in community. It's about learning in libraries. It's about learning in the environment in a way that we didn't always honor in the past. What is the destination? When we think about, not only based on research, but based on what we know about our future, which is actually a lot we don't know, but what we do know is our learners that are graduating from a BC first-class education system need to think critically, need to think creatively, need to collaborate and work closely with others, need to problem solve, need to risk take, need to communicate in a wide variety of forms, inclusive of the digital environment. And above all, they need to pay attention to social and emotional competence. They need to make moral and ethical decisions, not because there was an adult in the world, but because it was the right thing to do for themselves, for the community, for the world. It's that set of competencies that is our destination in British Columbia. So the destination are the competencies. The content becomes the vehicle. The content becomes the vehicle. You can't think critically in a vacuum. So the content becomes the vehicle, if you will, for practice, for practicing communicating, for practicing thinking critically, for practicing thinking creatively, for practicing being socially and emotionally competent, for learning about personal identity. The content becomes the practice place. So if you think about what used to be in our schools was all about the knowing, it's now way bigger than the knowing. It's about the knowing, it's about the doing, it's about the understanding. It's about constructing knowledge and meaning and utilizing rich content to do so. So this is a mindset shift, and I know from the work I've done with you as public librarians that this is your world. So the exciting thing is this is not new for you. For many of our colleagues, this is a mindset shift. And so we need lots of opportunities to figure this out. So what you'll see, even though the government has said that there will be full implementation September 2016, what we know is that implementation is a process, that it takes time. And what we've invited, so if you're working with teachers in the school district, what we've invited them to do is choose a piece of this curriculum and competency work that they're passionate about. And figure, just take one piece of this. So think big and act small. You cannot do it all. And everywhere Jan and I are, that's the message. Use the resources you've got. And Mary and I had a great conversation last night. She was drinking tea, I was drinking white wine. But talking about in our school systems, reaching out to public libraries. You've been reaching out to us for a long time. I just can't tell you how critically important it is that this is a reciprocal relationship. And what are we doing in our school districts to be reaching out to the incredible resources we have in public libraries? So that sets the stage. So what you see is redesigned curriculum, and I know you as public librarians, you have already been on the website. So we know you've taken a look at that. please make sure you do take a look at the competencies because that's the destination. So just to recap, learner at the center, destination are the competencies that I listed: communication, thinking, personal and social, with those subdomains of solving problems collectively and creatively, taking risks. All those subdomains are in there, working collaboratively. That's the destination. If you haven't had a chance to look at the little video clips from all over the province in relation to the competencies, please do so. They're there. They're from teachers' classrooms. They're from BC classrooms that will show you. Here's a glimpse into what it might look like throughout British Columbia. So although knowing you probably found all those videos, I'm sure. The other part, we really care that you know what is foundational in this redesigned curriculum. These are the core principles of learning from OECD. This is what makes a difference to learning. So when are we going to align what we know with what we do? This is what we know from a wide body of research. So if this is what we know maximizes learning, what are we doing with what we know? And I'm not going to list through them. I'm not going to go through the list of them, but what we do everywhere we are is to say to educators, listen, this is what's making a difference to learning. This is a learning agenda. This is what's making a difference to learning. Take a look at the list. And what here do you feel really good about in your learning environment? And what's one of these principles of learning you would like to work with? The one here around descriptive feedback, that's extremely difficult to do. And yet we know it's the number one difference made to learners when they get explicit descriptive feedback. That takes practice. And that's just a whole lot harder to do than mark a multiple test paper. So we're working on that throughout our province. But that's when we're able to do that, that's what makes a difference to learning. So just like kids practicing, we in education need to practice what we know is making a difference. So those are our fundamental. Up here you can see the personalizing. Again, please, we're not talking about 30 IEPs in a classroom, individual education plans. We're talking about kids owning their own learning. You know, in our schools, in particular in our elementary schools, we own way too much of it. You know, our elementary schools, which is basically where I've spent my life in K to 8, too much goes on that's about compliance. What we really are looking to in the future is around creativity, innovation, problem solving, experiencing failure as a way of knowing. And that, all of this that we're talking about, this is a shift in thinking. Key ideas and learning standards. So if you take a look at the curriculum up here, and if you take a look right here, these big ideas, okay? These are essential core understandings. These are big ideas. All curriculum, kindergarten to grade 12, is built with this same framework. And Jan will show you that in graduation. So what you have here are big ideas. Are they the only big ideas at any particular grade level? Absolutely not. But I come back to what I said, space and time for teachers. Those of you who are familiar with the past curriculum will know that there was an inordinate amount of prescribed learning outcomes. What you see here is those prescribed learning outcomes are now being called learning standards, which is right here. So we're not using the word PLOs anymore, prescribed learning outcomes. We're talking about learning standards. And I'm really proud to stand here and tell you today that we have minimized what's being prescribed in order to maximize creativity, innovation, critical thinking, problem solving, opportunities for kids to generate ideas and work together on something they're passionate about. There is now space and time in this curriculum to do so. Whereas before, what we heard a lot of was, I don't have time for social emotional learning. I have to cover the curriculum. So one message we like to leave with you is this is not about covering curriculum. This is about uncovering curriculum. It's not about covering. It's about uncovering. So when you see 3 big ideas at a particular grade level, as you see right here, that does not mean those are the only 3. but it's left space for teachers to generate other big ideas based on who are those learners in their room. And you will know that it looks very different from Haida Gwaii than it does to West Vancouver. So who are those learners? And how do we personalize for them what they're passionate about? It's no different than us as adults. The level of engagement, there's a direct correlation to what happens for learning. Okay, so we need kids to be engaged. And that's not about kids, actually. It's about us changing our instruction. This is a strength-based curriculum. It's not about kids being different. It's about us changing what we're doing, about designing thoughtful, deep, meaningful learning experiences and sequences so kids have opportunity to really be passionate about something. This is very different for many, many people. For some of us who have been subversive our entire lives in teaching, that would be me. That would be my colleague, Jan Unwin. It's not a whole lot new to us. We just shut the door and did what we knew we needed to do. Put those kids at the center. Paid attention to curriculum, but actually it wasn't our driver. Our driver were those kids. Now, this has actually been the hidden curriculum, these competencies, because we were teaching those anyways. Teaching critical thinking and creative thinking and communication and social emotional learning has been inherent in our teaching for years. It now makes it explicit that this is the destination. So you'll also see an explicit focus, I've talked about that, on core competencies. And really, if you think about this curriculum, and now I'm talking K to 12, although K to 9 has been finalized, 10, 11, and 12 operates on the same framework. And this is concept-based and competency-driven. That's the framework we're working with. Far more flexibility, far more choice. The other thing in our work with parents has been a lot of, well, you've taken all this out. So now this is really thin. In fact, to do this in a way that really involves deep learning actually has more rigor, not less. More rigor, not less. But really making sure parents are assured that numeracy and literacy are foundational in what we're talking about. We know, and Janice heard it over and over again in her work with post-secs, what the post-secondaries, and that's all institutions, not just universities and colleges. All the post-secondary have said, look, we don't care what happened in Science 10. We care that the graduates from the BC education system are numerate, are literate, and are personally and socially responsible. So paying attention to what we're hearing. So numeracy and literacy, foundational, they haven't gone anywhere. We need, the kids that are graduating from our system absolutely need that skills, that knowledge, those aptitudes, and it's foundational in what you're seeing here. I think the last bullet here also I just really want to highlight, and that's that Aboriginal perspectives, worldviews, and pedagogy have been woven into the framework of every curriculum, K to 12, from the beginning. Aboriginal scholars, Aboriginal knowledge keepers have been part of the development of this curriculum from the beginning, not added on at the end. We're operating on the First Peoples principles of learning, which is everything we believe in. They've been thinking and living and being that way for hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, being reflexive, spending time paying attention to place-based learning, learning from the land, building on the gifts of every child. I mean, that's inherent in those First Peoples principles of learning. And it is here too. So really building on the strengths and the gifts of every kid. And every single child, regardless, has those strengths, has those gifts. And that's our job, to really make sure we're illuminating them. Notice too, we're talking about learning environments, not classrooms. This is way bigger than the bricks and mortars. This is, as I said earlier, about learning anytime, any place, anywhere. And just to end here, I just want to show you these three triangles at the top there. Those are the core competencies. So C for communication, T for thinking, and P PS for personal and social. Under personal and social, it's inclusive of social awareness, it's inclusive of personal awareness and responsibility, social responsibility, and then one that the Aboriginal knowledge keepers and scholars said to us, look, this is missing, and that's positive personal and cultural identity. And so because of their feedback, that too became a subdomain under the competencies. And, positive personal and cultural identity is good for every kid. So that is in there. And as I said, all this framework looks the same. Here are the learning standards. Here you have curricular competencies. Here you have concepts and content. Please look, and if you're working with teachers and educators from our school districts, this is where the focus will be. This will be where the emphasis is. This becomes the vehicle for developing these curricular competencies. The core competencies come alive through the curricular competencies. Okay? And I'm just going to end this part by saying what we know is that this redesigned curriculum is not the change. Technology is not the change. The change is what our educators do with this. All right? That's what was going to make a difference to learning for kids. That's what's going to move us forwards, is what educators choose to do with this curriculum. And at always, that's one of the things, and as we travel throughout the province, we keep saying, choose one place that you want to start. Just start. Think big and act small, but start. Right? And it's not about technology. It's not about curriculum. It's what educators decide to do this. And you are an incredible resource to us. And honestly, our work is to really nudge schools and school districts to be building a reciprocal relationship with public libraries. It goes both ways. We need you now more than ever. So I thank you for your work. The other interesting thing about this is it's so founded on relationships. Our world is, right? Our world is about relationships. Our education system is about relationships and building those relationships to really support learning. And the part I really love is there is no app for that. So I'm going to ask Jan to come up, and she's going to follow through everything we've said from K to 9. All those foundational elements apply to 10, 11, and 12, and she'll give you the status of where that is now.
So I just had a question as I was listening to Maureen. How many of you have kids in our system right now? Hands up. How many of you have had kids in the system? They're done and they're out. How many of you went through the system? Okay, everybody's hands up at some point. So you'll probably understand this from a personal level of, I got it. I have to stand over here. I forgot. Thank you. I saw ruffling around over there. My mic's on, right? Yes, it is. See, I was all engaged. I was going to talk about engagement there for a minute.
Yeah, you can wander.
Oh, except I can't because of that thing, right? I can't wander too far. Okay, I will plant myself. One of the things that's also driving us in the background, and this is partly why the graduation learning years will go more slowly, but we have data that shows us over and over and over again that engagement in learning dissipates in direct proportion to the grade levels. So kids come into our system, they're curious, they're confident, they ask questions, they have hands-on, and then as they go through the grade levels, their engagement in their learning dissipates, goes down, and compliance sets in more and more and more. And one of the things I did as a high school principal and as a superintendent was talk to the kids leaving our system. And even those kids that appeared, they got the 98.7241 grade point average, the kids that appeared to be successful. When you talk to them, they sound way more compliant than they did engage. Tell me what I have to do, and I'll do it so I can get this and go there. Versus, I loved what I was able to learn in this way. So the big idea, and the reason it'll take longer, as you know, in the graduation learning years is because the stakes are higher there. Right? And it has direct connection to post-secondary for the most part. And about 70% of our kids at some point will end up going through some sort of post-secondary. And that number will get higher as we go through the years because, as you know, there are a lot of PhDs working in Starbucks because the graduation document now doesn't get you a heck of a lot. And as computers and robots and outsourcing comes along, we have to start to really engage kids in the learning, get them to be entrepreneurial, get them to be innovative and creative and resilient. And we can't march them out the door like compliant little learners any longer. Having said that, we have a lot of structures that were built for compliance learning. You'll recall some of them were 80 minutes of courses that are unrelated to the other one. So you'd go to one course, you'd open your books, you'd have 80 minutes of learning, the bell would ring, you'd shut that, you go to the next one, had nothing to do with this one, your teachers never talked necessarily, and then you take all of that unrelated learning home and do 4 more hours at night of unrelated learning. What we know is it's actually flies in the face of what we know about learning. It's not how learning happens, but the systems and structures that we have to dismantle are even greater in the graduation learning years. So it will take longer. That connection to post-secondary, we have our problems with systems and structures and being institutionalized. Theirs is 100 times more institutionalized. So we have to connect. What we don't want to do is have kids running from one system into the other like they're running into a brick wall. So the conversations there have been great. They've been really positive. It's working through the how are we going to do this. We all believe it's necessary and we all believe we must. But the how is what's going to mean that we're going to strategically take one step at a time. So when you think of all the questions you have, you will probably have some questions around provincial exams and all of that, and we can answer those in the question piece. But I just wanted to give you a sense of one of the real drivers is we've got to stop marching compliant learners out the door when there's not a lot of work for people who are just being compliant anymore. This is the other thing that was interesting as we looked at the redesign. So this is the educated citizen that's in the legislation. And it was written in 2009. So the interesting piece about this is we took it out and said, well, we better redesign that when we redesign everything else. And yet when we looked at it, that's still what we want. The problem is in the past, kids have left our system and we had no idea if they were that. So what we want to move towards is a curriculum and practice that actually gives us some evidence that kids are a BC educated citizen. We don't want to do here's what our educated citizen is, we're going to measure all these things and kind of have a wishing and hoping kind of approach to the BC educated citizen. So you'll notice a lot of the core competencies sit inside that. Not to reiterate this, but this is basically to tag on to what Maureen said, is the design, the form and function of the curriculum will be the same K to 12. So the concept of big ideas, and this is more difficult for senior secondary teachers to wrap their head around as well. And that's a wide sweeping generalization. But for the most part, you'll find a lot of people who went in with heavy content knowledge as a teacher. I'm going to teach physics. And now we're asking them to teach kids about physics and the need for physics and the application of physics in the real world, etc. So it's a mindset shift, but more difficult. So for example, in Social Studies 11, we would do things like, you'll remember this because it's still pretty much the same, memorize all these facts about World War II. All the birth dates of so-and-so and all the list. And now what we're hoping for is we're going to look at a big idea like world conflict. I'm making this up, but just to give you the concept of the big idea would be world conflict. Some kids will learn about world conflict through studying about World War II, but other kids will study things and go deep in their learning around things that are actually more relevant to their history, their culture, but they're learning the big ideas. That's really what we're after. Did that work, Mary? Okay, good. The first drafts are out there for people to respond to, and there has been a lot of response. And the good news is we've asked post-secondary to give us their thoughts on it too. So they're weighing in on, what do you think? Are we making sure that kids who do choose post-secondary, we're not designing our system for post-secondary, but we want to make sure that there's connection so that the wheels don't come off when implementation time comes along. We also understand this, that the kids go in many directions and they go in many different times in their life. They choose a different direction. And as you know, there's stats that talk about the thing you think you're going to be at the beginning turns out to be nothing like what you might end up being or any of the journeys in between. And there's so many numbers that just are mind-boggling about numbers of different times you will change your career. And that isn't even this next group of kids coming up through the system. And often they're not even related careers. Like I've changed my career, as have you, Mo, many times, but they're all in education. We're talking about complete shifting of careers. So you can see one of the other places I think where you'll fit and be really helpful, particularly in the graduation learning years, is helping kids figure out their life journey, just becoming more of those coaches and mentors and activators. And we're hoping to break down some of those walls of learning and stop the madness of the 80-minute blocks, and the only learning we're going to count is what happens in the 3 hours a week we're with those kids. But to get them out into the communities and help them personalize their journeys by talking to other people who work in other areas. And I can see public libraries being a huge place of learning for kids. Once we stop saying, you have to get here at this time, you have to sit here for this long, and you have to leave when we tell you. If learning really does happen anywhere, any place, any time, we need to honor that. And I think the big idea around that, though, is there's still an incredibly important place for adults in kids' lives. Because there's a lot of research about that, too. And I'm not just talking teachers, I'm talking you. When you connect to kids and kids feel cared for by an adult, they connect to the learning. And we could do a little experiment. We won't because we don't have time. But if you just stopped and thought about who made a difference in your life, which adult in your journey through education, you'll come up with one. And that was the person who cared about you, knew your story, and didn't judge, just helped you along your way. That's the role we want adults who come in contact with these kids to play. And we hope to get them spending more of their time in place learning versus sitting in a seat learning. Now that's a dream and a goal, and we're going to take some time. That won't happen by next Tuesday. But we also didn't get here in 2 weeks either. We're in a place that we've just kept doing what we do because we have always done it that way, and now we know some things. I just wanted to put this slide that kind of got all weird in the transfer of the deck, but suffice it to say this. One of the things that we're trying to do is shift the notion of career, because it isn't the same. For us, career meant, what do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to be a teacher? Do you want to be a doctor? We need to shift that for these kids because they don't know, and we don't know what's even going to be out there. We want to shift the definition of career to their life, it's one's life story. So the hope in the graduation learning years into the future is that the kids will have that time to create their profile of their life story. Who are they and what can they do? And they're going to need help with that. And I could see a real role as you start to get kids in your places of learning and engaging in that conversation of just helping guide kids into a profile of learning, a portfolio of who you are and what you can do. Because at the end of the day, when these kids go out for their work, and it's happening more and more, it's more and more we're hearing employers say, I really don't care what's on your little dogwood, your little piece of paper that has letters and numbers. Show me who you are and what you can do. And you've got 5 minutes. So those kinds of putting a life profile together will be a much more important thing for kids, and they're going to need help with it, for sure, as is the system. So at the end of the day, there's some good news around all of us, early learning through to post-secondary, working towards some of these big things around we must. We know we have to instill confidence in kids, and that has nothing to do with age they're at, but I can tell you this. The research around confidence and success is mind-blowing. If you're confident, you have a way bigger chance of being successful. And what happens is, through nobody's fault, But the way our system is built and the way kids are coming to us, we're actually bashing the confidence out of them along their journey. And we need to stop the madness. We also, as Maureen said, you have to align what you do with what you know and what you believe in, especially around things like assessment, instruction, and reporting. And if we had a whole other thing we could do just on assessment alone, and how the way we assess in some cases actually bashes confidence out of kids. And we know better. So we're working on some of those things too. Big idea is we all want the very same thing. We want to give kids their best life chance. And so we need to work together. And when I say work together, I'm just not talking about the education sectors or the people who are direct contact with the education sectors. But if we really want this next generation of kids to knock it out of the park in a world that looks nothing like ours, then we're going to have to come together and give them their best life chance together. So I would say that's a good opportunity to turn that over to Mary. On that note, anyways, thanks a lot. There you go, Mary. Over to you.
I think you guys are answering questions.
Oh, are we? Okay, well, we're answering questions. Come on, Mo. Are we? What do you?
Oh, I'm not going to say anything.
Oh, okay. Okay, so think about anything you ever want to know. Anything you ever want to know. And we'll see if we can use our long sorted past to give you an answer. Is there anything that sprung to mind around I wonder about? Feel free. Remember, we're teachers and we know about confidence, and we're not going to say anything is a good question. It's all good. Yes?
You've probably had this question a lot of times. I like what I hear, but I just wonder from a teacher's perspective, how are you ever going to find time to, even though it's not, personalized education, in some ways, what did you call them? The learning standards are going to be the same, but they're going to be embarking on different ways of reaching those, right? So how as a teacher are you going to have time to deal with this whole class?
You have to remember, you have to go in front of this, and I'll just take a first crack at that.
If you could repeat her question.
Good point. The question was basically around time, and how are teachers going to have time to sort of get to all kids in this personalized way? Is that about right? So really it was the time issue. And you take the first crack, and if I'll add in if you don't have...
So one of the gifts, first of all, there is no one right answer. So let's start right there. And so much depends on who the teacher is and their pedagogy and their methodology. So let's start there. That's a factor for sure. The gift here is what's prescribed is the minimum to really allow opportunities for teachers and for kids to go deeper with the curriculum. So I'll give you an example. So it's not about, and I really thank you for the question, it's not about 30 kids doing 30 different things. So let me just use an example of Egypt, which, by the way, has been in the grade 7 for curriculum for how long? How many here in the room did Egypt? I did too. I remember getting an A on the title page. I really loved, doing those pyramids with the glitter. It worked really well. And that's, yeah. So let's just take Egypt as an example. And by the way, all the feedback we collected, Egypt's a really good example to use because our grade 7 teachers who are passionate about teaching Egypt, and some really are, were just up. There was just an uproar. Where did Egypt go from grade 7? So I just want to use that one as an example. And by the way, we said to them, if you're passionate about teaching Egypt, please keep teaching it. People are worried about engaged kids. I worry about engaged adults. So if you've got someone who's passionate about their keep teaching it. But here's the mindset shift. So Egypt, let's say I'm the grade 7 teacher and I am passionate about it. The bigger idea here is around ancient civilization. So I can teach and model concepts in ancient civilization utilizing the vehicle of Egypt. But when it comes to project-based learning or the projects the kids are doing, it didn't have to be 30 kids working on Egypt. Those kids now have the opportunity to choose a topic, an ancient civilization that is part of their cultural heritage that is culturally responsive to who they are. And trust me, there's not a class of kids that are all equally passionate about Egypt. So although I'm the grade 7 teacher, I'm using Egypt as the vehicle for teaching ancient civilization. When it comes to the work those kids are doing, they get to choose the ancient civilization that connects with who they are. So that's just one example that it actually is really exciting because you have time to be able to do this.
And if I could just add to that imagine what kids would learn as they're hearing about ancient civilizations that cover the sort of the relevance of the kids who actually are their classmates. So it's a mindset shift, and I got my own. It's a mindset shift for adults in a big way, because teachers feel responsible to teach the things to kids. That's what we do. And now it's be a coach, be a mentor, activate them in their learning, help them engage in their learning. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. And we've created a one-size-fits-all system. So this isn't going to be one light switch turning off and the next light switch turning on. It's going to be teachers getting comfortable with having way more space and time in the curriculum to seize the teachable moments, right? And that's not a definitive answer, but it's in the hands of these professionals who have signed up to engage kids in their learning. Yes?
You talked a little bit earlier, Dan, about how this new curriculum approach will change other things like assessment and so on. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how, some ideas for how assessment will change, enhanced ways of looking at assessment.
Sure. Why don't you start and I'll add in again.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So there's...
Repeat the question?
Oh
yeah.
You think this is... Okay. The question was, how does a redesigned curriculum sort of influence redesigned assessment? Okay. And in the graduation learning years, and to some degree in the K to 9, there is two kinds of assessment. There's provincial large-scale assessments, and then there's everyday classroom assessments. So one of the things that getting back to the confidence and descriptive feedback and the kinds of things that you talked about, when there's more space and time in the curriculum, the hope will be that there'll be opportunities for teachers to spend way more time giving timely, accurate feedback to kids so that the learning happens. I'll give you another example of one of my dreams around how this can reshape assessment practices, and it's in secondary. Right now what we do, we want to shift the system to get to a strength-based system. Some of the things we do right now when we give percentages, I'll just give that as an example, is we add up a bunch of numbers and divide them by 100 and then report on the average, which isn't proficiency-based assessment. In other words, if I was really bad at it and I worked really hard at it through all this feedback and I got really good at it, let's use skating as an example, and if I fell down a whole bunch and the other kid did not, but I'm skating here now, does it matter how many times I fell down? Or are we looking at proficiency-based assessment, which would mean we'd have to relook at doing reporting on the average? Do we want to just report on how proficient the student is today? Or do we want to keep punishing them for the times they weren't proficient? Well, think back to your driver's license. Were you as good that first time you tried it out to when you are driving now? And if that just kept haunting you. So proficiency-based assessment is one of the ways in which this redesigned curriculum can force us to relook at how we assess kids. How, when, and in what way. The other pieces around, we know some things about ongoing information versus report cards, for example, that are in blocks of time, and they're awful, right, in schools. We now have technology, and we can continually report progress on a regular basis. So how do we put assessment and reporting into sort of this new domain?
And just to build on what Jan said, the other thing that districts and teachers are working at all around the province is how do we change how we're communicating student learning to parents? So rather than, as Jan said, these report cards being an event, you get a report card, you cannot, as a parent, often even understand what the language is saying in this report card. It becomes an event in schools. The whole absentee of teachers goes up during these stressful periods, and a whole lot of learning isn't taking place. So where we're shifting to is ongoing communication of learning. And what we see all over the province is teachers working at documenting student learning. So documentation. Students documenting evidence of their own learning. And parents receiving it not 3 times a year formally, but on a continuous basis. Comox has been doing some really interesting things. Parents have the QR codes, so they can actually swipe that and see into a learning portfolio which contains evidence of student learning on an ongoing basis. Assessment in the classroom, really fine assessment in the classroom, has been going on in British Columbia in pockets for years, really focusing on assessment for learning. Far more formative assessment we're shifting to versus the summative. There always will be summative, but looking at formative assessment, ongoing assessment of student learning. The other shift here is kids owning that assessment. Kids working with peers to give each other feedback. Kids owning assessment of their own learning. Kids knowing where they are. Actually, this whole sense of grades that we have in schools is completely false from what we know how learning happens. Learning actually happens on a developmental continuum. And if we ruled the world, we would have gotten rid of those grades. It doesn't stop at the end of grade 6 in June and then you start something else in grade 7. It's on a continuum, as you would well know. So how are we as teachers supporting kids in figuring out where they are, knowing where they are on a developmental continuum in any particular discipline? What are their strengths? And what descriptive feedback can I give that student to move them along the developmental continuum of learning? They are in a whole different place, possibly in physical education or art education, compared to where they are in literacy or numeracy. So having space and time in this curriculum versus focused on me, the teacher, covering, gives me space to go deeper with paying attention to where those kids are on the developmental continuum of learning with particular reference to specific disciplines.
And I think just to add one more thing, we want to shift to more of an honoring of the principles of learning, and basically kids learn in different ways and at different rates. So then should we be assessing them all in the same way on the same day? We've discovered that some kids can communicate what they've learned in a very different way than what that assessment allowed them to do, because it was a one-size-fit-all. So we're making a judgment on something that actually isn't true around what they know. So it's shifting to what are some ways in which, A, we can get kids to take more ownership and show you evidence as a teacher of here's what I know and I'm able to do. And we also know that when kids start to begin to do that, they own their learning more, and you will stop hearing things around what's it worth, what are you going to give me, why didn't I get such and such?
Or what does it take
Right.
to get an A?
Yeah,
Right?
Just tell me, that kind
Instead
of
of talking about learning. So that's a classroom assessment, but also you'll notice that the provincial assessment is changing too. So a provincial assessment, and John can speak to Science 10 and Socials 11, that created so much anxiety in kids and teachers for 20% of the mark, right? 20%. And all this time consumed with teaching to the test versus what we know that the classroom assessment would attend to and actually shift to the practice we want teachers to be able to have space and time to do without that pressure or kids feeling so pressured. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, and there was some, there's always going to be press on both sides of the world around what have you done, because people tend to match rigor with how many tests you take. And rigor really is how deep you go in the learning, right? And we were discovering that all of this, like grade 10, in our consultations in the province, the thing that came back louder than anything was do something about grade 10. You've got these 16-year-old kids, they have no choice in their timetable, and you're doing 3 provincial assessments. Only worth 20%, but it didn't matter. It was having kids I hate grade 10, I hate school, I'm stressed, teachers were teaching to the test, and it was to no end. They weren't being used for anything. Postsecondary doesn't care what happens in grade 10. So it was actually antithetical to what we're trying to do, and that is engage kids in a learning environment that they can demonstrate their learning without having to always worry about this thing hanging over their head. So The literacy and numeracy piece being the big thing we know, competencies being the main thing, but the foundation skill. There will be a literacy and numeracy assessment expected of kids as a grad requirement, and that's being developed as we speak. So graduation, likely kids will begin that assessment potentially when they're 16. Some kids could wait a bit longer if they needed more coaching and mentoring and teaching, and so it's again on a proficiency idea. Some kids will knock it out of the park when they're 16. Some kids need more time and more space and more help, and then they will do the assessment either again or later in their journey through the grad years. That's the hope.
I think the other thing that Jan talks about a lot too, because you have parents that come in to your public libraries, you've got kids coming into the public libraries, working together, really assuring parents that, this is a Jan quote, no child will be harmed in the making of this movie. So I think we really want to assure parents, in particular parents of kids in grade 10, 11, and 12, that that's the reason this is moving slowly, in order to make certain that we get this right, connecting with whatever post-experience kids choose.
Yes.
A couple questions from Twitter, so you can just repeat them. So the first one, Jan, sort of related to what you were saying. The question is specifically about provincial exams, and will those change? I know you've spoken about proficiency, but if there are any timelines around provincial exams or what their fate may be.
So right now, as you know, and I'll just clarify, the removal of the provincial assessments at grade 10, which was Science 10, Math 10, and English 10, those are gone. Socials 11 is gone, and the replacement will be English 12, by the way, is still there with the provincial exam, because that is the course that post-secondary currently has incredible predictive data that shows success for kids and their chances for success. So that's still there. We're leaving that there until we don't need to anymore, if that ever happens. But currently those grade 10 provincial assessments and grade 11 provincial assessments are gone to be replaced by classroom assessments. It doesn't mean there are no assessments, right? It's just that we know that those kinds of assessments that happen in the classroom actually give a better sense of what kids know on a larger scale. So currently, as we speak, provincial assessments are being developed in literacy and numeracy, teams of teachers, and some folks from post-secondary, because we don't want to design it for post-secondary, but we want it to have some meaning to post-secondary, so that they can start to say, we were engaged in this, and we understand it and support it when the time comes. That's what's happening as we speak.
Oh, we should also say FSA is changing too. So it will be, kids will have choice, and which is what we know makes a difference to learning. So kids will have some choice in FSA, a choice of topics. There is a collaborative piece in this redesigned FSA where they're actually working together. So it too will be shifting, and it's just in the process of being finalized at this point in time.
And I should add just one more piece so that there's clarity. So those kids who are going into grade 10 next year will not have a provincial assessment, but they will have to take, either in grade 11 or grade 12, a literacy and numeracy assessment that will be created as quickly as we can do a great one before they graduate as a grad requirement, okay? And did you have another question?
Yes, it's
from
on
Twitter?
the other end of the spectrum though, age-wise.
Go for it.
Maureen, someone was just wondering about the early years and if there's any work with early childhood educators in terms of supporting them with knowledge about the new curriculum. And
Yeah.
if you could just repeat that question.
Yeah, so the question from Twitter is what's in place, or what are we working on in the early years that connects early childhood educators with the redesigned curriculum? Did I get that right? Yeah, so what we see, and actually we did an environmental scan starting in September. Personally, I phoned every single superintendent to find out what was going on. And then we called all the early learning leads. The lead there's leads in every district for early learning. They are often a teacher that's been seconded to a coordinator's position, or they're a district principal, or they're a staff developer, but they exist in every single district. And thanks for that question, whoever asked it, because I'll tell you, as public librarians, there's a document that has, we think it'll be finalized by hopefully August, that's our goal, that documents the practices that are going around, that are happening, around our province in relation to early learning programs and services within school districts. It's called Promising Practices in BC School Districts. The first version was out, probably December. We produced that with the intent of deepening it after we talked to these lead educators in districts. So please look for that. And what you'll see in there is pockets of examples where school districts are connecting with early childhood educators, Strong Start facilitators being one sector for sure, and including them in the professional learning opportunities around this redesigned curriculum. So we've got all kinds of examples in our province where school districts are reaching out and working with those early childhood educators. I can also tell you that you can expect around the province this fall regional sessions, which there'll be an invitation to early childhood educators and Strong Start facilitators with kindergarten teachers. So there'll be regional sessions in our province that brings those early childhood educators, Strong Start facilitators, which of course are ECEs, and kindergarten teachers together in planning, in talking about how does this redesigned curriculum to connect with what happens in the early years, how do we move forward around kindergarten transition. So that topic is definitely on our list. And we also have a lot to learn from the early childhood educators. So working more closely together with them is absolutely a goal of the Ministry of Ed.
I just want to add to that. The other piece of work that Maureen does with the Ministry of Children and Families Office of the Early Years is another way in which Maureen is really focusing on some really exciting things to come in early childhood. We know the piece is the whole picture, not just in segments throughout our K-12 system. So.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we know is that, especially for our kids with the highest level of vulnerability, we need to intervene early and we need to intervene often. And we have got families and children in our province who have not accessed early learning services and programs and arrive at kindergarten with no experience and often delays in language development. So we know we've got a lot of work to do there in our province. So that's definitely on our agenda as well.
Which is another great role that you play, is sometimes to get into your care.
Yes.
And when you know things, you now become the conduit to get them hooked up to the right people.
We probably should shift to Mary.
We should.
Then, we should probably shift to...
Yeah, traditionally formal education has been very structured, and
Yes.
what we're talking about here is breaking down those structures, or I think Jan's your words were breaking down those walls of learning. In 60 seconds, do you have a response to those who say that this redesign is unstructured?
So to repeat
60
that
seconds,
question.
That's it?
So the question was, we talking about breaking down the walls, and some I'm talking about figuratively and some real. Let's get some of those down. But there is another group of people who say we can't have an unstructured method of learning. So I will just sort of answer that question around, you can't go to either one size fits all. So it's not unstructured in its entirety, but it's more personalized and there's more choice in the learning. So the learning becomes more relevant, and that the concepts that you're learning become more connected is really what we mean about breaking down the walls. In other words, stop. We know nowhere else in the world do you learn in 80-minute isolated blocks of time that don't connect to the next 80 minutes, that don't connect to the next 80 minutes. So really, to summarize what we really mean by that is, let's really start aligning what we know about learning with what we do from our structure perspective. And we've actually seen some demonstrations of when you put kids into integrated places of learning, the engagement in the learning goes through the roof. So we know now that if you put kids in a number of in desks and teach to them, they will comply. But what we really want to do is let's start preparing them for the world when they get out there, where we work in collaborative teams, we teach in collaborative teams, and we try to make what they're learning more relevant to their lives. That's really what we mean. It's not about a free-for-all, which is a great question. I'm really glad you asked it.
And then I'm going to have my 60 seconds. I think the other thing that I think about too is what you see here. The ministry has prescribed the what, but not the how. And so teachers have methodology that varies. And you could be a very structured teacher and take this curriculum and continue to teach in a very structured way. And I really caution people from saying there's one right way of doing this. Who are you as a teacher? And you need to really build on your strengths. And there's nothing, you can have fantastic, I'll never forget Ray, who taught grade 2, taught it for, over 40 years in a very structured way. Very structured, traditional way. Those kids loved him. He had great relations with them. And those kids learned how to read and write in an amazing way. So there's no one way of doing this, which I love. So there's professional autonomy here for teachers to build on their strengths as well.
And I just want to have the last word.
Okay. Well, then I'll have another last word. Yep.
But the breaking down the walls really applies more to the way we've set up high schools. Elementary, they do that. They know their kids. They have their kids all day, every day, and they do integrate curriculum. It's about how can we set up the systems and structures. Do we really need a 5x8 timetable where every student is expected to sit in the seat 120 hours in order to get their 4 credits, even when we know they don't all learn in the same way at the same rate, etc. So it's those kinds of structures that I think, having said that, each teacher is going to have their own style inside of that. But what are some ways, particularly at high school, that we can start thinking about integrating the curriculum, teams of teachers working with teams of kids?
And on that note, we'll segue to Mary. Mary
Here's
Martin.
Mary. I'll turn off this.
I don't know how you follow that. Thank you so much, Jan and Maureen. It's such an inspiration every day to work with people of your caliber and your passion. So thank you again. And thank you for West Vancouver for enabling this opportunity. Jenny and your team have been excellent, and they really did. Jenny came to us with this idea and said, we want to have a shared learning opportunity, and we also want to be able to do it outside of the Lower Mainland as well. So again, thank you for that, reaching out. It's so great. Hi, everyone. I wish I could come and visit more of you more often, so out there, but this is a great way to showcase some of the work that's going on. I don't have a lot to say because they've said a lot, and really this is a thinking and learning and engaging time for you, and so I want to make sure we have as much time to do that as possible. So just to share with you a little bit, one of our roles of the library branch is to help facilitate your access to learning and sharing in libraries. So that's one of the things I do take really seriously in terms of our role. We help to make connections between government priorities and goals and the work of libraries. So we're a conduit for those conversations. And as community-based organizations, libraries play such a critical role in supporting engaging people at every stage of their life. And for government, this is critical to have a conduit to people. So thank you for the work that you're doing every day in that perspective. I don't know about you, but when I hear from Jan and Maureen, I just sit there and I nod my head. I sit there and I nod my head because I hear the words personal learning and connecting to passions and interest and recognition of informal learning, new partnerships and focus on reading and numeracy and critical thinking. These concepts are not new to any of us, and it's especially not new in libraries. I can't think of a library program or surface by their very nature touch on at least one of these. if not all of them at once, if I think of the programs that you offer and services. What is exciting for me from a library perspective is the recognition that within the system, what is exciting for me to see from a library perspective is the recognition within the system of how we all learn and what skills we need to adapt in this changing world. Many of the concepts that Jan and Maureen talk about in terms of what they're seeing in education and the shifts that OECD is suggesting and the educated citizen and all those components, that's our world. That's our library world. It's the world that we work in and you work in. And those changes are happening every day. So how are we adjusting? How are we shifting our services and the roles we play? I don't need to tell you that people go to the library to learn about what they want to learn about, right? They're there to learn about what they want to learn about. They're there to ask questions and to find answers. But we're also seeing a shift in how libraries are providing answers and providing learning opportunities. It isn't just about having the bird guy come in and talk for an hour about birds. Now it's about having a forum for birders to talk about their passions and share their knowledge with the wider community. So we're seeing lots of shifts happening there, and that to me just really aligns with what's happening in curriculum shifts and the modernization. So just building on that, there's lots of opportunities for libraries to think about what they do, how you do it, and if there's any things to shift or change, because maybe there isn't. Maybe you just keep doing more of the same. You learn about it, of what's going on in your world. You connect with educators to make sure that you're in a line, you're aligning, you have an understanding, and you have conversations about what can happen next. For me, really the goal today is to help highlight some of those key changes within the education system, those changes in the thinking, and some of the tangible examples of how that's actually playing out in the school community. But really, I'm here to listen and learn from you as to what you're already seeing and noticing. How are children and students and parents using your libraries in different way? Are you seeing the shifts that Maureen and Jan are talking about in your communities? And if you are, how are you reacting? How are you planning? What changes are you making? How are you thinking about your own roles as librarians in those changes? Are you seeing youth and teens in your library at 10 o'clock in the morning when it used to just be the mums and babies? How will you be shifting services? Are you seeing those changes? What does it mean for libraries when learning will happen more and more outside of the classroom? What are the challenges and opportunities that provides for you? And how do you work with your community and your school districts and your teachers and your parents to be part of those conversations, to be part of the learning environment, that learning ecosystem that will exist and does exist out there? And also think about what role libraries can play in supporting learning for students, but also those parents and caregivers. So are there people around the students who also need that support, that information, that broader community of learning, so that they can learn and share too? So we're not here to prescribe anything, but to provide an opportunity to have Jan and Maureen share with us today. And I hope we have some more questions coming from folks as we delve into more of the learning experience. I'm looking over at Jenny, so if you have people on the phone, I keep looking at her for the next step. And I really encourage you in your online there to have these discussions as well. And I'll just pass it over to you. So thanks again. And I won't take your notes.
Okay, so you've heard a lot of information over the last, let me get it the right way up and we can go forward. In the last hour and a half, both from our presenters and the excellent questions, and thank you so much for all those great thoughts. Next, we're going to move into small group discussions around how the redesigned curriculum might impact public library service areas. So I'm going to be asking you to meet in groups according to service areas. You'll notice there are 4 flip charts around the room. So space and collections, reference and information desk service, and programming. You can pick your service area based on your interests or your library's priorities. It's really up to you. There are many library systems here today, and I want to ensure that the small group discussions are really relevant to you and your organization. So in your groups, please discuss what you've heard about the redesigned curriculum and then answer this question. What implications might the redesigned curriculum have on your service area? So on the flip charts, if you would record your thoughts, and then you can report out on them afterwards. Those of you who are joining us on the webcast, please do the same at your location, and you'll have your opportunity to add your thoughts via the Twitter feed. So we're all going to take a quick 5-minute break and then come back into the groups, and we'll have about 20 minutes for the discussion. Washrooms and water filler is right across the hallway by the information desk. And for those of you online, if you'll rejoin us in about 20 minutes. Great. And you guys are welcome to join a group.
What we can do is just rotate and listen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Either way.
Nelson or Pearson, all those days are all that's gone, right? And it's really the question is, right? What are they passionately interested in? And give me what those topics are, and I can help you with the selection of books. That's really the question. There's that. Oh, that's